This land once ruled half the known world. Today, it stands at the center of global controversy. Empires once bowed before its kings. Its roads stretched across continents. Its ideas shaped civilizations. Now, its name echoes through headlines filled with tension and uncertainty. How does a civilization rise to such greatness, fall from that height, and still refuse to disappear? The answer is buried deep in centuries of power, conquest, belief, and survival. But history does not unfold the way we expect, because one decision, made long ago, quietly reshaped everything, leaving a legacy that still defines Iran today. Long before the name Iran was ever spoken, this land already carried the weight of history. Between mountains and vast plains, along rivers that sustained life, an early civilizations took root and began to shape a world still in its infancy. Among them were the Elamites, builders, rulers, and survivors, who carved out one of the earliest organized societies in this region. They forged cities, developed systems of power, and fought to hold their place in a land where strength determined survival. This wasn't an empty land. It was already alive with culture, power, and conflict. Kingdoms rose with ambition, and just as quickly, they were tested by war and time. Generations passed, each leaving behind traces of ambition, struggle, and identity. The land absorbed it all, every victory, every defeat, quietly preparing for something greater. Because history here was never still. It moved, it shifted, it waited. And then, from the shadows, a leader emerged. Not born into overwhelming power, not handed an empire, but driven by something larger than conquest alone. He saw beyond borders that others feared to cross. He understood that control was not only about force, but about vision. What began as a small rise in power soon gathered momentum, drawing attention from allies and enemies alike. His name started to carry weight. His actions began to reshape expectations, and his ambitions stretched far beyond the limits of any ruler before him. This was more than expansion. It was transformation. And as his influence grew, so did the realization that the world was about to change. He wouldn't just build a kingdom. He would change the idea of the empire itself. From the edges of a rising world, a name begins to echo across the land. Quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. A leader steps forward, and not defined by inherited greatness, but by vision, discipline, and an understanding of power that few had ever grasped. This was Cyrus the Great. His rise was steady, calculated, and deliberate, turning small victories into momentum that could no longer be contained. As his influence expanded, what followed was the birth of something far greater than a kingdom, the Achaemenid Empire. It stretched across vast lands, connecting cultures, languages, and traditions under one rule. But this expansion was different. It wasn't built on destruction alone. It was guided by strategy, strengthened by tolerance, and sustained through governance that allowed diverse people to live under a unified system without losing their identity. In a world where conquest often meant ruin, Cyrus chose a different path. He allowed traditions to continue, unrespected beliefs, and rebuilt what others had torn down. His approach reshaped the meaning of leadership, turning control into something more enduring. This vision was captured in the Cyrus cylinder, a symbol of authority exercised with restraint and intention. And in that moment, something changed. For the first time, power didn't mean destruction. It meant control with purpose. An empire stood not only on strength, but on the idea that stability could be achieved without erasing those who lived within it. But as the empire expanded, so did the attention it drew. Its wealth, its reach, its influence, none of it went unnoticed, because the larger the empire, the greater the target. From beyond the eastern horizon, a force begins to move, swift, relentless, and driven by a vision that refuses to slow down. So kingdom after kingdom falls in its path until it turns toward the greatest prize of all. At its head stands Alexander the Great, a leader whose ambition stretches as far as the lands before him. What follows is not a slow decline, but a sudden collapse. The mighty Persian Empire, once unshakable, is caught off guard. Cities burn, palaces fall, and the order that once held vast territories together begins to fracture. The tone shifts instantly. Power gives way to chaos, certainty to loss. What had taken generations to build is undone in a fraction of time. Yet even in defeat, the story does not end. Under Greek rule, something unexpected begins to take shape. Cultures blend, ideas merge, and a new identity quietly forms from the remains of the old. Persia is no longer what it was, but it has not disappeared. From that transformation, a new powers rise. The Parthian Empire reclaims strength with resilience, pushing back against foreign control. Then comes the Sasanian Empire, restoring a sense of order and pride, reviving traditions that once defined the region. It is a return, but not a repetition. The land has changed, shaped by everything it has endured. And through it all, one truth becomes clear. Persia had survived. But something far bigger was coming. Because this time, the challenge ahead would not simply redraw borders or replace kings. This time, it wouldn't just change rulers, it would change identity. A new force rises from the south, unified, driven, and carrying a message that moves faster than any army before it. It reaches the borders of Persia, and within a generation, everything begins to change. The old order, once restored under powerful rulers, it now faces a challenge unlike any it has known. The armies of the Arabs advance, and with them comes a new faith, Islam, spreading across the region with speed and conviction. The resistance is fierce, but the outcome becomes inevitable. The structures that once upheld the Sasanian world begin to fade, and with them, the influence of Zoroastrianism slowly declines. For those who lived through it, this was more than a political shift. It was deeply personal. Traditions that had defined generations stood at a crossroads. Some held on, others adapted. Many found themselves caught in between. It is here that the story turns, because what follows is not the disappearance of a people, but their transformation. Iran didn't vanish. It absorbed, reshaped, and endured. Its language continued to evolve, carrying echoes of the past into a new era. I see its art adapted, blending influences into forms that were both familiar and new. Its identity, though altered, remained unbroken beneath the surface. Through change and uncertainty, something essential survived. But survival came at a cost, and the worst was yet to come. Across the vast landscapes of the East, a new storm gathers, moving with unmatched speed, leaving entire civilizations struggling to comprehend its force. It arrives without warning, reshaping everything in its path. At its center stands Genghis Khan, a leader whose armies stretch across continents, driven forward with relentless momentum. When they reach Persia, the impact is immediate and overwhelming. The once resilient cities, shaped by centuries of culture and power, are swept into a wave of destruction that touches every layer of society. Under the Mongol invasions of Persia, order collapses across the region. Trade routes vanish, administrative systems break apart, and centers of learning that once defined the region fall into silence. What follows is not just conquest, it is devastation, on a scale that alters memory itself. Libraries that held centuries of knowledge are reduced to ash. Cities that once stood as symbols of civilization are emptied and broken. Generations who carried the traditions of the past are erased in the flow of violence and displacement. As if one wave were not enough, another force emerges later from the same vast expanse. Timur rises, continuing the path of conquest with equal intensity, bringing further destruction to lands already weakened by earlier invasions. The emotional weight of this period is carried not only in the collapse of structures, but in the silence that follows, an absence where culture, memory, and stability once stood. Cities burned, knowledge lost, generations erased. Yet even in this overwhelming darkness, history does not fully close its doors. Beneath the ruins and silence, something remains unbroken, waiting for the next turning point. Because it looked like the end. But history had one more turn. From the silence left after centuries of invasion and collapse, something begins to gather again within the land. Not suddenly, but steadily, like a nation remembering itself. Fragments of authority return, scattered regions begin to align, and a sense of direction slowly reappears across a wounded territory that has endured far more than its share of destruction. And out of this period of rebuilding rises the Safavid Empire, marking a turning point in Iran's long and fractured history. Power is not only restored, it is redefined. The empire brings structure back to lands that had long been divided, restoring unity where uncertainty had taken hold. Cities begin to stabilize, governance strengthens, and a shared identity starts to re-emerge from the remnants of earlier eras. But the most defining shift is not political alone. It is deeply spiritual and cultural. The establishment of Shia Islam as the dominant identity transforms the fabric of society. It becomes more than belief. It becomes a foundation for unity, distinguishing the region from its neighbors and shaping its internal cohesion for generations to come. In this renewal, Iran becomes unified again, not just in territory, but in identity. And after centuries of fragmentation, there is structure, direction, and a renewed sense of purpose. Communities reconnect with shared traditions, and a cultural rhythm begins to stabilize once more. That decision would shape Iran for centuries. Yet even as unity returns, it carries a quiet limitation, because strength within does not always mean freedom without. And while the Safavid era restores order, it does so in a world where external forces still hold influence over the land's fate. But unity didn't mean independence. Across the turning point of centuries, Iran stands once again at a fragile balance, unified within its borders, yet surrounded by forces far stronger than its own control. Empires beyond its frontiers begin to extend their influence inward, not through open conquest alone, but through pressure, negotiation, and strategic dominance that slowly reshapes decisions at the highest levels of power. Among the most influential of these external powers are the United Kingdom and Russia, both positioning themselves within the region through competing interests. What follows is not a single moment of collapse, but a gradual tightening of control. Treaties drawn under pressure, borders influenced by foreign negotiation, and leadership constrained by forces far beyond its reach. Inside the country, leadership struggles to maintain stability. Authority exists, but it is often limited by external demands and internal division. Decisions that should belong solely to the nation are shaped elsewhere, leaving rulers to navigate a reality where independence feels increasingly conditional. Over time, this creates a deep sense of frustration, an awareness that sovereignty is present in name, but restricted in practice. Iran existed, but not on its own terms. The people continue to live, build, and preserve their identity, but beneath the surface is an unspoken understanding. Control is divided, and the direction of the nation is no longer entirely self-determined. Each agreement, each intervention, each imposed condition adds another layer to this constrained reality. And then, as this pressure reaches its peak, history prepares for another shift. A new figure begins to rise within this landscape, one shaped by a desire to reclaim authority, restore control, and redefine the nation's path on its own terms. Then came a man determined to take it back. In a nation weighed down by external influence and internal uncertainty, a new force emerges with a clear ambition to rebuild authority, restore order, and reshape the direction of the country with decisive action. The landscape is one of fragmentation, and into it steps a figure determined to impose structure where instability has taken hold. This is the rise of Reza Shah. His ascent marks a shift towards centralization and rapid transformation. Roads, institutions, and military structures are reorganized with urgency. Traditional systems are replaced or redefined as the nation is pushed toward a modern identity built on discipline, efficiency, and state control. The pace of change is swift, and its reach extends into nearly every aspect of public life. Alongside this transformation comes an increasing presence of external cultural and political influence, particularly from Western powers. New ideas enter the country through education, infrastructure, and diplomacy, reshaping expectations of governance and society. The balance between tradition and modernization becomes more complex with each passing year. After his reign, leadership passed to Mohammad Reza Shah. His position is marked by a difficult balancing act, maintaining internal authority while navigating external pressure and growing domestic tension. Efforts to modernize continue, but they exist alongside rising dissatisfaction and competing visions for the nation's future. The atmosphere becomes defined by contrast, progress on one side, pressure on the other. Development accelerates, yet so does resistance. The state moves forward, but not without strain. Every reform, every alliance, every decision adds to a sense of tension that cannot easily be resolved. And then, everything collapsed almost overnight. A nation already stretched between rapid modernization and rising tension reaches a breaking point where every layer of society begins to shift at once. Streets fill with voices that have long felt unheard, and the balance of power that once seemed secure begins to fracture in ways that can no longer be contained. The pressure that has built over years finds its release in a wave that moves across the country with unstoppable force. This moment became known as the Iranian Revolution. It is not a single event, but a sweeping transformation that reshapes the entire structure of authority. The monarchy, long established and deeply embedded in the nation's modern identity, begins to collapse under the weight of internal unrest and widespread demand for change. Institutions that once defined the state lose their grip as momentum shifts toward a new direction. At the center of this transformation rises Ruhollah Khomeini, a figure whose influence grows rapidly as the movement gains strength. His return becomes a turning point, symbolizing a new political and ideological order that begins to take form. Leadership changes, not gradually, but decisively, as old systems give way to a new structure built on a different foundation of authority and belief. This was the decision that reshaped Iran forever, and the shift is immediate and absolute. What once was a monarchy becomes a republic shaped by revolutionary ideals. Power is redistributed, institutions are rebuilt, and the identity of the nation is redefined in real time. The transformation touches every level of society, from governance to daily life, leaving no aspect untouched by its reach. But the consequences were only beginning. In the aftermath of a revolution that reshaped the entire foundation of the nation, Iran entered a new era defined not by stability, but by challenge. The structures of power have changed, yet the pressures surrounding the country do not ease. Instead, they shift into new forms: military conflict, diplomatic isolation, and prolonged uncertainty that tests the endurance of the state and its people. Almost immediately, now the nation is drawn into one of the most devastating conflicts in its modern history: the Iran-Iraq War. Borders become battle lines, and cities are pulled into years of sustained struggle. The war is long, exhausting, and costly, leaving deep marks on both the land and the population. Entire communities are reshaped by the demands of survival, and daily life becomes inseparable from the reality of conflict. At the same time, relations with the United States grow increasingly strained. Diplomatic ties weaken, sanctions intensify, and political disagreements expand into long-term tension that affects trade, communication, and international positioning. Iran finds itself navigating a global environment where cooperation is limited and pressure is constant. Alongside these external challenges, internal debates emerge around nuclear development, international agreements, and national sovereignty. These discussions become central to global attention, shaping how the country is perceived and how it interacts with the wider world. At home, periods of protest reflect ongoing tensions between different visions of governance and identity, adding another layer of complexity to an already difficult landscape. Yet through this sustained pressure, a pattern begins to form. Despite war, isolation, and economic strain, the structure of the nation remains intact. Institutions adapt, society adjusts, and continuity persists even in moments of disruption. Through war, isolation, and pressure, Iran endured. Across thousands of years of shifting power, Iran stands as a rare constant in a world that has been repeatedly rewritten. But from the height of ancient empires to periods of fragmentation, from foreign domination to revolutionary transformation, its history does not move in a straight line. It moves in cycles of rise, collapse, and renewal that define its identity more than any single moment ever could. This is a land that once commanded one of the greatest empires in the ancient world, the Achaemenid Empire, stretching across continents and shaping the early structure of civilization. It is a land that endured conquest, fragmentation, and reinvention through successive eras, including the resilience of the Parthian Empire and the cultural restoration of the Safavid Empire. Each phase left behind not only ruins or reforms, but layers of identity that accumulated over time, never fully erased. It is also a land that faced collapse under invasion, and experienced centuries of external influence, and underwent dramatic internal transformation in the modern era through revolution and restructuring. Each turning point did not end the story, it redirected it. Power shifted hands, systems changed, but the continuity of civilization remained unbroken beneath the surface. This is not a history defined by permanence of rulers, but by persistence of identity. The empire becomes memory, the collapse becomes transition, and the reinvention becomes survival expressed in new forms. Empires rise, empires fall, but some civilizations adapt. And through every chapter, across conquest, change, and reinvention, one truth remains constant. Iran isn't just a country, it's a story that never ends.